All right, welcome to class today. Obviously, you can see I'm not wearing my most professional clothes, and so I feel like I should do something about that. So, better. I would say I could still be more professional, so, and finishing touch. All right, fantastic. Let's talk about short stories. I think I'm going to need a few props, and so there are notes on Moodle that you can follow along with. I honestly don't care if you fill them in or don't. I think it would be helpful for your future if you fill them in, but this information will help you understand the things that are going. So the first thing we need to talk about is what makes a short story. So, short stories. The first thing that's on your notes is length, I think. So let's talk about length. Normally, a short story can be read in one sitting. Maybe you experienced that with the story that you read, Sound of Thunder, which we'll talk about in a second, and maybe you didn't, but normally one sitting, maybe sometimes a good sitting, but if it takes a lot longer than that, it's not a short story. Second thing is the ending. What you need to know about the ending is that normally in a short story, in a longer story, it'll be like rising action and then like the climax and then the falling action, the resolution, all that stuff. In a short story, normally it's the climax, the action point, like the big moment, and then it just ends. So short stories are going to feel really abrupt to you. And the third thing that you need to know that Edgar Allan Poe said is true about short stories is the unity of effect, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but what you need to know about that is unity of effect. What you need to know about that is normally there will be one mood. So like either the whole thing will be scary and creepy, or the whole thing will be happy and lighthearted, or the whole thing will be like deep and thoughtful. So sometimes in a longer story, things will like move around and there will be lots of different ideas going on. There will just be one mood throughout the whole short story. It's pretty consistent. So these are the things that Edgar Allan Poe said that make up a short story, and I am going to add a couple of them using some really good art. So here's what I want you to know. Normally, in a short story, there will be one main character. One protagonist. Sometimes there will be supporting characters, not a ton of them. Sometimes it'll just be that one character. Like there will almost always be like the one main character that you're supposed to focus on. Unlike in books like To Kill a Mockingbird, where we can learn things from like Scout and from Atticus and from Jem and from like all the minor characters in that entire book. Normally, and I think that there are some obvious exceptions to this, there will be one character that I'm supposed to learn the most from or identify with the most. Number two, normally a short story takes place in a limited setting, like this. A tree that our main character is on top of because I wasn't specific in my magic. This is the limited setting, so normally it'll take place in one place and not be traveling around lots of times. Some short stories will take place in a single house or something like that. And then we're going to talk really quickly about conflict. There are a couple different types of conflict really quickly, and they all have to do with the protagonist. So it will be either him against himself. So as you can see, this is the guy and this is like his inner demons and he's fighting against himself. So one main conflict might be him against himself. Another type of main conflict that you'll see in short stories is him against society, groups of people. So first it was him against himself, and now it's him against our main character against society, but also pretend like there's only one here. It could be him against a specific person or man. So like people in general or just like one other person. The next one would, the next major type of conflict in a short story would be man against nature. So he might have a conflict. This is a really common one in short stories where like there will be something like him fighting against starvation, or him fighting against like surviving in the wilderness, or him fighting against being as large as the mountains that he is fighting against. These are all things. And then the last big type of conflict that you will see, man against God. So I don't know how to pictorially draw that. But a person fighting against like either a conflict of faith or a conflict of like why are these things happening in my life, or a conflict of like why are these things happening in the world, or some sort of struggle of a person against God. So these are the main types of conflicts that you will see. I tell these because if you have these in the back of your head, then when I ask you what's going on in this short story, this will kind of give you like a jump start into figuring out what's going on, because I'm telling you right now, these are the most common conflicts that you will see, and these will help you understand the conflicts that we are going to be talking about. The last thing is, and this kind of, we got at this in mood a little bit, is that normally in a short story there's one single theme. So rather than being like in To Kill a Mockingbird, where there's so many different themes going on, like related to friendship, related to identity, related to being an individual, or like standing up for what's right, or like racism, or all those different things that there are themes about, topics there are themes about. In short story, there will normally be one, and so there will usually be one thing that you can pinpoint and say, this one thing is what the author was trying to say. Cool. So now let's take a second and talk a little bit more about like some specifics that you will see in this story, and things I think will help you understand the other stories. So the first thing that you need to know is about symbols. You've probably talked about symbols before. This is not meant to be super new for you, but maybe a reminder of things that you already know. A symbol is a literary device that contains a couple layers of meaning, a couple, like one thing you might notice at the beginning, or a couple things that you might notice as you keep going on. Things that are both visible at first glance, but also like hidden or like deeper meanings that you will either know or slowly figure out. So an example of a symbol like that has layers of meaning would be something like a dove, right? At first glance, it's simply like an animal, it's a bird, and yet when you start to think about like the stories you know about doves, oftentimes they are symbols of hope. Especially we know like in the Bible, a dove is like a messenger that brings hope, that says like the end isn't near. We think about like Noah's Ark, things like that. Other ones would be a cross, right? For some people, like a cross is a simple like wooden structure, but for us, like there are a lot of layers to like what the cross means, right? Like, so like even going deeper would be like Jesus died on a cross, and that adds layers of meaning. But then like thinking about what that impacts or what that changes in my own life, right, is an even deeper connection there. To go on the total opposite end would be like a swastika. That I don't think I need to say that like that is obviously like a very negative thing, but it started out as like a symbol or just like a shape, but it became a form that is a really negative thing that like obviously means like hate to people, especially like Jewish people. Has been a rallying cry of hatred for people. Things like rainbows have a lot of different meanings, from being like symbols of hope again, or just like something beautiful, or a sign of something that is going to like be better, or all the way to like leprechauns and gold, to the rainbow being like a rallying cry for the LGBTQ community, right? Like it is a symbol that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Or like a Confederate flag would be the same thing. Historically it meant one thing, and now there in like present day America there are two different groups, one that says like it's a symbol of my heritage, and another one that says like no, it's not, it's a symbol of like hatred and oppression, how dare you like rally behind that. So this is all, I give you all these examples to say like different symbols mean different things for different people, and that kind of makes them tricky to look for, but also it makes them powerful and like I think helpful. That is helpful for you to know in the way that you are looking at these things. You might remember, just to give you a quick example, the short story The Lottery. We read it last year as you were a freshman. In that story there are a lot of different things going on that I'm just going to tell you about that will help you read the short stories you're going to read in this unit. So like things get repeated over and over, right? Like there are different like ominous words that they use throughout that story. That's the one, if you don't remember, where like they literally like draw a lottery, and then at the end they end up like stoning that woman Tessie, which is terrible and awful. But you don't see it coming. But then when you go back and reread it, it's like, oh yeah, people kept being like, why other people aren't doing this? Like, why would they quit? And then like there's that feeling of dread that slowly grows throughout it. There is like the wooden box. I don't know if you remember this many details, but like there's a wooden box that keeps showing up, and it's like a symbol of the tradition. It's like tattered and falling apart, and nobody remembers where it comes from. And like the more the author talks about it, the more you realize like they don't know anything about this tradition. The box is what they draw names from, and so just like the box, like the tradition is like old and falling apart, but they're clinging to it without knowing where it came from, right? So like the more you can pay attention to like small physical details like that, or small things that might seem unimportant, the more you can be like, oh yeah, this black box is like a symbol or like a metaphor for like what's going on here. And if you don't remember that story very well, that's not very helpful. But if you do, then like that's the kind of stuff that I'm going to be asking you for, right? Like, why does the author keep repeating this thing? Or like, what do you think are the main symbols in here, or stuff like that. And then, I don't know, there's a lot going on in there. And so if you remember that story, it's a good one, and I'll give you more examples. Probably to do with it later. The last thing that I want to talk about really quickly is actually A Sound of Thunder, or The Sound of Thunder, which is the story that you've hopefully read by now. A few things I want you to know about it. It's obviously a very science fiction-y short story. I think it follows a lot, but not all of the characteristics that I gave you earlier in this like quote-unquote lesson. It is something that we call speculative fiction. So it's Ray Bradbury is the author, and he's speculating about something that he thinks might happen if we continue living our lives that we are currently living them. So he's trying to like give us a warning about how life might go if we continue being like a turd like we are. So a couple of the things you maybe noticed in there, he repeats a couple of things in there, and one I think I asked you about, so here's an answer if you made it all the way to this point in the video. There's the sound of thunder, right, which is a sound of, I think, coming destruction, which I think plays out both in like really specific ways, right, like we hear thunder and then, oh, somebody or something dies, but also like I think he's trying to symbol that like the world in general is like facing this sound of thunder, right, our world in 2020, which is not when he wrote it, but I forget what year he wrote it. He was like, guys, there's this sound of thunder. There is destruction that is coming if we keep living our lives the way we are, just like these characters do. And the second one is the butterfly, which I think if you Googled butterfly effect, which is one of the questions I asked you to do, there's like, it's that idea of like one small thing can create a huge ripple effect. They've done like movies on it and stuff. But basically the idea being like slight harm, the slightest harm that we might do, the tiniest thing that we might do might have a big effect. And this can be true either positively or negatively. And so I think that's one of the questions he's trying to ask. Like, what are the small actions I'm doing that may not seem important, like stepping off a path or like doing this, or you know what I mean, like et cetera, that might have a ripple effect hugely positively or hugely negatively. And then finally, like the idea of the path, I think is another symbol. So like sound of thunder, I think is one, butterfly is one, I think the path is one, where he talks about like sometimes it's hard, but sometimes important to like follow a path. So the question being like, what's the path you're following and why, right? In which ways are you living deliberately or not deliberately? Are you intentionally trying to live a life that does not harm, or are you just kind of like wandering wherever you want to, right? And so I think that if you understand those symbols and kind of put them together, right, like the coming destruction of the thunder, the butterfly, the idea of like harm, and then the path of like, which path are you following? Are you actually doing harm or not harm? You start to understand, I think, one of the things he's trying to get at, which is like how we interact with the world, right? And I don't want to totally like hand you an answer there, because I do want you to dig with it a little bit, but I do think he's asking us some pretty big questions about how we interact with the world, and what we want to do there. So anyway, there are some like quote unquote notes. You're obviously not going to have a test or anything like this on this, but these are things that will legitimately help you in the future. And I think that you should know them, and they will also help you deeply understand the things that we're going to be doing for the next couple weeks. So you're wonderful. If you made it to the end of this video, then I'm very proud of you, and let me know that you made it, and I'll give you a prize of some sort. Anyway, you're great. Have a good day.